So we got Hule again and Apocalytic Shadow, and I think Archer in this particular case is a pretty good matchup. And normally Archer has a lot of core drawbacks that a lot of players might not mention. He is very SP hungry. He tends to want to favor an advanced forward character as well as somebody who can give him energy back, so that way he can use his ultimate more often. Thankfully, because of the way Apocalyptic Shadow is set up and the way this Hule fight is set up, a lot of these issues are heavily mitigated. For example, whenever we break Hule, we obviously get all of our skill points back as well as getting our energy filled. I am going to exploit that in this fight. And then when the duel mechanic for the one-on-one takes place, Hule is automatically going to advance forward that particular character. So whenever Hule does that duel for a second time in each phase with Archer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave myself in a position to where I only need one arrow to weakness break him, and then that's going to give me 4 shots plus an ultimate to be able to use to take out the remainder of his health. So that's the strategy that I'm going to be using for Archer, since mine is a lower investment. So there's definitely been a growing sentiment in the community in regards to Honkai Star Rail being better in the past. Now, I personally disagree with this sentiment, and while I do think certain things were better in the past, if I talk about the Belobog arc of the game, for example, I don't think it's one-to-one better than what we've been getting offered in Amphoreus across the board. It's basically like a pros and cons. We lost out on some things, but we gained some other things in the process. So I want to go ahead and give my POV on things, and then we'll just go from there. One thing that Belobog did a really good job of doing is establishing itself as a strong first major arc. The Herda Station was essentially our introduction or our prelude chapter, and then Belobog hit it off very strong. Another pro with Belobog was that the game was still in that new phase, so all of us was still in the honeymoon phase of the game. We were discovering things, and we were just having a good time with the game. You know, it was fresh, it was new, it was exciting. Another portion of this was that accounts were more relatable and comparable to one another. Now, of course, this doesn't apply to Whales or Leviathan because their accounts are never relatable anyways. But for free-to-plays and small spenders, we could like compare with each other, and we were around the same progression level. So we had more in common with one another. That's something that you can't really give props to with Amphoreus, because with Amphoreus, there's going to be a big difference between a free-to-play player who's been playing consistently since like the 1.x patches, or just somebody who's free-to-play and they just started playing during the 2nd anniversary. There's going to be a radical difference between their accounts, even though they're both free-to-play. Now, back then during the Belobog, because we just didn't have a whole lot of characters to work with, wonky team comp building was more of a norm back then. So we had to work with what we had, and there were some crazy combinations, but people made it work back then. Something else that a lot of players love about the Belobog arc is that it doesn't really overstay its welcome. It's lengthy enough, but it doesn't get too lengthy, and I think that is a common criticism that a good number of players have with Amphoreus. They just feel like it's too long of a story arc. I personally don't share that same sentiment, but I also kind of somewhat understand where some players are coming from on that note. Obviously, we had a good, pretty solid, if not good, finale boss fight. Wildfire is still a really good song in my opinion. It's still in my top 3. It's not number 2 for me, it's definitely number 3 when it comes to boss fights. Trailblazer also plays a pretty big role in the final confrontation, and we can't really say for sure if that will be the same thing with Amphoreus at the moment, but we can definitively say that for Belobog since that story arc has ended. And another positive with Belobog from a community perspective is there wasn't a whole lot of Honkai Star Rail drama back then, as far as I'm aware anyways. Like, people were just happy to play the game, discover something new, and enjoy it for what it was. Now, with that being said, Belobog did come with a couple of cons. Gameplay was still in its infancy stage, so Break was still in its infancy. T.O.T wasn't even really a thing because Kafka wasn't even around until the Lafu arc. I mean, yeah, we had Sampo, but it's Sampo. Summons didn't exist, and etc, etc. Also back then, because the game was still in its infancy, all of the characters that were DPS characters back then, they were all just attack scaling. So the game hadn't really been out long enough to start introducing us to different archetypes of characters, such as like an HP scaling character like Blade that we didn't get into the Lafu arc. And then another con with Honkai Star Rail was because it was so new, players in general were not as informed about the game as they are now in 3.x. I feel like the general knowledge has increased a lot in comparison to when Belobog was the main thing. Now, talking about Amphoreus, I think one of the biggest pros with Amphoreus is that every playable character is important. They are major. There is no such thing as a minor playable character, so no 4 stars. Now there are going to be some individuals that do hate that aspect, but honestly, I think a lot of people have brought up a very valid counter argument. Would you really want your favorite character to be a 4-star character when you want them to get the proper 5-star treatment, so that way you could play that character for even longer in comparison to a 4-star? And I think that's a very valid counter argument. There is a lot more lore to work with and the Amphoreus arc in comparison to Belobog. Belobog was still new, so there was a lot of story lore threads that hadn't started yet, and as of Amphoreus, we've learned so much more about the universe that we're in comparison to when Belobog was the primary focus, which means we have so many more theories that we can come up with. We've gotten so many answers, but that also opens up a lot more questions. I think it gives a lot more avenues for story-based discussions in comparison to what we had during Belobog. Also, with Amphoreus, different playstyles are being fleshed out if they hadn't already been fleshed out in the 2.x. Obviously, during Pentaconi, there was a big focus on break/super break, as well as single target focus teams, since like Xiao, Topaz as a resurgence, you know, when we had Robin come out. So in regards to Amphoreus, they've had a big focus on HP scalers. We got introduced to the true damage mechanic. The summons mechanic got expanded upon through the remembrance path. So you're getting more variety in gameplay. You're getting more variety on how you can approach the content in a good amount of cases. And also I would say we've gotten a harder push on AoE content than what we might have had in the past. That's another thing.
Eternal state.
It's combat meter. This is double speed.
Alright, and then for the other side, we have quote-unquote a Xiao. Now, this is the most DOT-oriented boss fight that we've gotten up to this point, and I thought the Apocalytic Shadow version of Phantalia was very DOT-oriented. Wow, this takes it to a whole nother level. Now, the main gimmick or mechanic of this fight is quote-unquote a Xiao is going to turn one of your characters into a Borison. That Borison will then be able to do toughness damage based on the number of DOTs on the enemy, as well as weakness break efficiency as well. So, essentially, this fight really favors you bringing a lot of DOT characters here. Also, whoever you make as the Borison is a character that you would ideally want to have be very, very fast. Faster that your character is, the more advantage that you'll be able to take of this mechanic. On top of that, if you were to use this mechanic with characters who have zone type buffs, like say maybe like Robin, Tribby, Run May, and they have like a certain skill effect, that will kind of preserve it and extend out on the duration of it while that character is in the Borison form. Pretty cool. One other thing that I'll throw out is if you are using an Acheron team, every time that the Borison does attack one of the parts of Xiao, Acheron will be getting a stack. So that is something that you could be taking advantage of if you are wanting to use Acheron. I'm also thinking for this boss just in general, Sam team might be able to work out really well. I've seen a Caster's team with Hyacinth, Tribby, Ron May work out pretty well for this fight. I'm suspecting Finon should be able to perform pretty well on this fight as well, but I haven't seen confirmation on that. But I figure since everything has physical weakness, it's probably a viable option. And then of course Acheron Blade team might struggle a little bit with this fight, but I was able to get something done with it. And then of course DOT is probably going to be one of your strongest options. Another pro when it comes to the Amphoreus storyline, it's essentially Greek mythology slapped with the Honkai Impact 3rd Elysian Realm story arc. And I know there are some Honkai Impact 3rd fans that are not a fan of this because they've already experienced the Elysian Realm. And the only thing I can really say for those players is they're able to do a different take on this from what they were able to do in the Elysian Realm, and plus they're able to do some things different here that they were never able to do in Honkai Impact 3rd. You can't expect a lot of players to go back and play the Elysian Realm, primarily because it's not available in English dub at all. And also on top of that, there are certain key male characters that are not even playable. So in Honkai Star Rail, every single male character has had the opportunity to be made playable. Again, we would not have had that opportunity to have that under Honkai Impact 3rd's ecosystem. I think the changes are warranted in this opportunity to retell the story. A lot of people are a fan of the Elysian Realm story arc in Honkai Impact 3rd. As an arc, it's my personal favorite. I love the Elysian Realm. We got more variety of in-game content in comparison to 1.x. So we've got Pure Fiction, we've got Apocalyptic Shadow, which was not a thing back then in Belobog, and we're also going to be getting a new game mode in the next patch as well. There's speculation that this is probably going to be catered toward spenders, but we'll have to see how that is when that game mode comes out. And then in regards to major bosses, while I think Belobog's final boss is completely fine in animations, nothing wrong with the boss animations whatsoever, I do feel like bosses like Nikador and Flame Reaver have really upped the ante or the bar on animation expectations, and I do think that these bosses do have better animations in general in comparison to Belobog's boss. So I'm seeing those improvements there, but that's just me. If you're somebody who prefers the final boss of Belobog and you think that boss has better animations, I don't think there's anything wrong with that either. At the end of the day, this is just a preference. I'm just giving you my personal POV on this. Amphoreus does come with two major cons. This first one isn't a con for me, but it is a con for a good number of other players. The story length is very, very long for some players. This isn't really nearly as big of a problem if you are somebody who is invested into the characters, but if you're not invested into the characters, it's going to be very, very hard to get through the story. And then there's some people who don't like story whatsoever, so for those type of players, nothing could be done. Story length will not be a factor for them because they're going to dislike the story either way. Nothing can be done for those players. And unfortunately, another con, this is more of a community-sided one, is that I do think that there's too much Honkai Star Rail related drama out there, sometimes amongst content creators, and it's just wild to me sometimes that you have a pretty chill game, but then the certain parts of the community anyways just want to create all of this drama when it's not necessary. And while yes, it's okay and even necessary to criticize some of the shortcomings of Honkai Star Rail, a lot of times I do think that it is blown way out of proportion, or it's just outright false narratives in general. There's a ton of doom posting when it comes to the post-release of certain characters. I've seen very commonly individuals get in the mindset of, oh, character XYZ is only going to be good for like 2 or 3 patches and then they're going to quote unquote be power crept. I know that this is just not true. Players have proven time and time again that a new character is going to be viable for far longer than that in most cases. Sparkle was basically an outliner example, but she's gotten a resurgence in relevancy more recently with the release of Archer, so she's back to being a great character for somebody, which is good. If I was to give a real life example in regards to the individuals who are constantly doom posting about the character strengths post-release and things along those lines, I think it would be the equivalent to somebody working a low-end job. They go into the job, they do the absolute bare minimum. They're just there to get a check. They don't push themselves. They don't work on their social networking skills. They don't ever try to move up in the company. And they also don't look for other jobs where they could potentially make more money or advance faster. They just basically want everything to be catered to them without them putting in any effort on their end. So I'm just gonna say this, as a real life example, cost of living continues to go up. If the respective job that you're at or wherever you're at doesn't respect your time and you are a hardworking individual and you have been working with your networking skills and they're not working with you, you simply just change up your strategy. You look for work somewhere else once you have those opportunities. But of course, you have to build yourself up and have good social networking and things along those lines. A lot of people aren't willing to do that, so they get stuck. They end up making the same money and they end up drowning in bills eventually, if not already. People got to be willing to put in the work, and I think for players who do put in the work and they do take out the time to ask for help, they're normally pretty successful. The way I personally look at this, for the people who tend to doom post a lot, I think they are misusing their energy essentially, because the way I see it is if they have time to doom post a character, and they got time to look up a guide, they got time to ask for people for help online, and there's plenty of nice people online in the Honkai Star Rail community who will help said person out. As long as they're being chill about it and they provide the correct information, people will help. The information is out there. People just have to go and look for it essentially. So my short TLDR is Belobog did certain things better, Amphoreus did certain things better. I do see the improvements with the game, and I do think that Honkai Star Rail is in a better state than what it was back during the Belobog arc, even if there have been new issues that have arisen since the release of the game. Of course, this is just my POV. I'll be looking forward to this game continuing to improve, and I am planning on staying on the Astral Express till the very end, unless of course something happens to me in real life. If you had taken out the time to watch this, listen to this, just want to say thank you so much for your time. You be safe out there. Deuces.